Tory candidate was trustee of church that endorsed conversion therapy. Shock horror headline from BBC 2 days before election by remarkable coincidence. It's about Miriam Cates. Now, Miriam Cates, I would say, is probably the best Conservative MP. She'd be quite at home in the Scottish Family Party, I think. My only criticism of her really is that she is a Conservative. She supports the Conservative Party. She encourages people to vote for the pro-abortion Conservative Party. So in other words, she doesn't really represent the values of the Conservative Party, but she makes a lot of people think the Conservative Party is a bit more palatable, a bit more on their wavelength than it actually is. Now, some people might say, well, why don't you encourage a bit more? Why haven't you praised her a bit more over the years? Well, it's not really my job as an opposition party leader to be praising representatives of rival parties, but she has spoken up about a lot of things, and that has been good. But the election's coming along, and obviously the BBC would like to see the end of her in the Parliament. So they've got this headline: she was trustee of a church that endorsed conversion therapy. Now, the definition of conversion therapy that's generally accepted, any church that's remotely sort of orthodox in its Christian faith would endorse conversion therapy. But the BBC thinks this is a big story. So, Conservative candidate Miriam Cates was trustee of a church while it promoted so-called conversion therapy, the BBC has learned. That really annoys me when they say so-called conversion therapy. As if they're saying, this is what those Christians call it, but we think that's the wrong term because it doesn't really do that. But it's not. The term conversion therapy was made up by opponents of the Christian teaching or whatever. It's made up by the opponents. So having introduced it and standardized the term, they now call it so-called conversion therapy, even though they made up the term. And no one who engages in helping people with unwanted same-sex attractions actually uses it themselves. Anyway, an independent report has concluded that conversion practices which seek to change or suppress someone's sexual orientation or gender identity were endorsed and supported by St. Thomas Philadelphia Church in Sheffield between 2014 and 2019. Notice change or suppress. So it's not just about, for example, someone experiencing same-sex attraction going to experience opposite-sex attraction. It includes someone, say, experiencing same-sex attraction that doesn't want to act on it, just wants to remain celibate. Anyway, Mrs. Cates was a member of the church between 2003 and 2018 and a trustee between 2016 and 2018. She told the BBC she was unaware of the allegations and that she does not endorse gay conversion therapy. Now, that's a rather unfortunate statement from Miriam, I believe, there, because I don't think that really reflects her views. Because by conversion therapy, they mean helping someone. The standard definition is it includes helping someone who's experiencing same-sex attraction to either not act on it or to move to heterosexual attraction, into a heterosexual relationship. I don't believe that Miriam Cates doesn't endorse that. I believe that she would fully support someone being helped on that route if that was what they wanted for their life. Anyway, although the BBC has not found any evidence that Mrs. Cates had direct knowledge of gay conversion therapy taking place, the report found that it was openly discussed and part of the church's culture during the time when she was a member and some of her time as a trustee. So the BBC's sole evidence here is that she was associated with this church at the time when, as we'll see later, an LGBT activist has made these accusations against it. This is a Church of England church. When these so-called accusations were made, the Church of England appointed Barnardos, an entirely secular, pro-LGBT ideology organisation. They appointed Barnardos to conduct an investigation into a church. I mean, it's just bizarre. Anyway, but that's we won't go into that too much. That's the Church of England. That's not our patch. So they carried out a report after Matt Draper, a gay man, complained that he was the victim of an exorcism ritual there in 2014 before Mrs. Cates was on the board of trustees. An exorcism ritual. Now, to a lot of people, that would be an entirely alien term. What does that mean? In some types of churches, then there is the idea that evil spirits or whatever can be cast out, sent out, removed, or whatever. That's something. One of the ways you pray about something. So if someone's got some issue with them, I mean, it could be an illness or some sort of a challenge or a behaviour problem or some sort of sin that they're caught up in or whatever. Some churches, some Christians would talk about dealing through that in terms of, you're dealing with like demonic influences, that sort of thing. Now, I don't need to go into the details of that. It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with that. But that's a pretty mainstream part of a lot of churches. If you look at what Jesus himself did, then he spent a lot of time casting out demons, and that would come under the banner of exorcism. The Catholic Church as well believes in exorcism. So this report into the church said the culture of the church was one in which the presence of evil spirits and ungodly soul ties, I don't really know what that means, were believed to be the cause of homosexual thoughts, feelings and behaviour, and prayers of deliverance for homosexuals were not uncommon. Again, within that context, if there's an issue like that someone's facing, praying for deliverance would just be the form of words, if you like, or that would be the theological principles underlying the way that people might pray for someone in an awful lot of churches. So that's not something special to people with their homosexual attractions. That's just reflecting the general theology and understanding of the church. Right, the report said that while gay members of the church would be welcomed, there was a firm belief that these individuals would eventually understand the need to be transformed to live in accordance with biblical revelation and Orthodox church teachings. Shock horror. How about that? The church believed that people's lives should be transformed to bring them into line with biblical revelation and Orthodox church teaching. Now, the fact that obviously is what churches are going to want to do. That's just taken for granted. In any church with vaguely conventional Orthodox Christian beliefs, that's what they would believe. But the BBC thinks this is something that's been exposed by an undercover team. Very odd. Right, next thing. The report said there were celebrations in the congregation because a parent stood up and spoke of an adult in their family who'd been delivered from the sin of homosexuality. Again, if you believe homosexuality is a sin and someone moves beyond that and moves out of it, then obviously that's cause for celebration, isn't it? That's just pretty straightforward. As far as the BBC is concerned, this is part of the cumulative case to see off Miriam Cates on election day, they hope. Apparently, Bernardo's in their investigation said they were contacted by someone else from the church who went to a course that was about inner healing and deliverance. Again, there's an awful lot of churches around Scotland. There's an awful lot of churches around Edinburgh. They would see inner healing and deliverance as part of their pastoral care for people and part of the way that they would help someone to move into the future that God has for them, or however they want to word it. They said a link between spirit possession and homosexuality and the ways in which these spirits should and could be expelled, and how as a consequence homosexuals would be healed. And again, that language might seem very alien to a lot of you. I'm not going to comment on it. Some Christians would use that sort of language. Some Christians would maybe not use that so much. But again, it's fairly mainstream in sort of traditional Christian belief to see things in that light, in terms of spiritual activity. Let's put it that way. They'd heard about or observed ministries which sought to heal homosexuals. Now, again, if there's something in someone's life that's not in accord with God's will, if you like, if that's the view of the church, and then would that be something that they'd see them as in need of healing from or transformation from? I mean, it's linguistics, really. I mean, what word do you want to use to describe a process where something in someone's life that's not positive is removed and they're then free from it in their view? I mean, healing seems a sensible word to use for that process, but again, the BBC thinks this is something hideous that they have exposed. Documents and screenshots seen by the BBC indicate that healing and deliverance courses involving sexuality and sexual identity were still being hosted at the church in 2019. Now, those courses, I would imagine they weren't exclusively on those topics, but sexuality and sexual identity might have been some of the things which people were seeking to deal with in their lives within the context of this course. Now, during her time in Parliament, Mrs. Cates was a vocal opponent of attempts to ban so-called conversion therapy. In other words, you're getting the link here, readers. The reason she tried to stop a ban is because she actually thinks it's fine. She thinks it's a good thing. That's the implication you're supposed to get there. But Mrs. Cates told the BBC, "I do not and never have advocated for what is referred to as gay conversion therapy." Again, I'm afraid I don't think that actually accurately reflects her views. Now, you could say, It's 3 days away from an election. What can she do? She's just got to try and damp the story down. She can't try and explain what she really believes. No one's going to listen. But the problem with that approach is if Miriam Cates doesn't take it, then the next person in line is in an even weaker position. For every person who doesn't speak out about what they really believe, the next person they go after is in a weaker position. There's strength in numbers. If Miriam Cates has said, well, let me explain to you what I believe, that would have put everyone after them, all Christians in the firing line, Muslims as well, after them, in a much stronger position. But unfortunately, she didn't. She just tried to smooth it over and make the issue go away. She said she wasn't aware of these allegations at all while she was a director of the church. So the report by Bernardo says the church has basically moved on. They don't do this sort of thing anymore, right, which is quite interesting, isn't it? So the Church of England is very happy that this church doesn't deal with people on the basis of the traditional message of Christianity anymore. Well, that's always what the BBC is doing here, isn't it? I mean, it's a hit piece intended to make sure she doesn't get re-elected. Miriam, I full support in the way the BBC is going after it. It's completely unjustified. But on the other hand, it would have been better if she could have just made a case for what she does believe instead of just trying to deny the whole lot. But I make that criticism of a lot of politicians, don't I? Instead of actually putting forward the case for what they do believe. So let people hear it. Let people think, well, actually, that makes sense. Actually, I mean, I thought this conversion therapy business sounded really terrible. But the way she put it, well, that sounds quite reasonable, actually. But she didn't take that opportunity, unfortunately. So in terms of the conversion therapy ban, the Conservatives are now saying the conversion therapy is abhorrent, but they're not quite sure whether to make it illegal or not. They're not quite sure how to do it. So I think, you know, if you uphold traditional Christian beliefs or Muslim beliefs or whatever, can you vote for a party that says helping someone to live in accord with their faith that you share should be illegal or is abhorrent? If you think it's abhorrent, but maybe or maybe not should be illegal, then maybe the Conservatives are the party for you. All the other parties in the Scottish Parliament, they will have a conversion therapy ban introduced in no time. Labour guaranteed it's going to happen. So if you want your church leader, if you're a Christian, or your imam at the mosque, whatever, if you want to see them locked up before too long, then you can vote for any of the parties in the Scottish Parliament. The Reform Party, I'm always thinking there's something like a sort of Reform Party delusion, a bit like the Conservative Party delusion. People just assume that the Reform Party are going to be better on these things, that they would stand up for this. But I don't see any evidence of that. I think they would see this as an issue that's too controversial, and they'd really rather leave it alone. But if you think conversion therapy ban is just a bad thing, there is no problem that they're trying to solve, because people should be free to seek support to fulfil their own goals for their own life. If you agree with that, then the Scottish Family Party should get your vote. Thanks.